What if we could redefine success, live more fulfilling lives, and perhaps address some of the global challenges that require coordinated action? I believe we can, and that there's never been a better time. I was born here in Perth, Western Australia. I was 6 the first time I was hit in the head for being rich. I had a noticeable name before I knew why it was being noticed. And while at that age I wasn't sure I really knew what rich meant, and I was surprised to learn that my family was, I had no idea why it warranted a punch in the head. I didn't understand the scale of my father's success until much, much later. Because in those days, if you had humble origins, you kept them quiet. He was raised by a single mum who herself had no record of who her father was, in the racist Rhodesia and the racist South Africa. When he was eventually kicked out, he took a boat to Melbourne. But on the crossing, he was told about the enormous iron ore discoveries in Western Australia. So, when the boat docked at Albany, he got off and had his passport stamped to stay as long as he wanted. Just a young man fleeing an oppressive regime, arriving by boat, allowed to stay indefinitely. From Albany, he took a bus to Perth, talked his way into university, and married his university sweetheart. That's my mum. And took off at a pace in business. To participate in the boom, he borrowed money from his mother and started buying and selling shares until he had control of the smallest company on the West Australian Stock Exchange. I watched on as a teenager as he exchanged these holdings over and over again until he had 30% of BHP, Australia's largest company, and control of the entire Beatles music catalogue. He was at the time one of the world's most successful businessmen. He loved the horses. On the weekend, I used to follow him to the races, and because he was my dad, they let me place bets before I was tall enough to see over the counter. He dreamed of winning the Melbourne Cup, and he bred a horse, and in 1985, it won while he was overseas, asleep on a business trip. In the US, he became friends with Sammy Davis Jr. and invited him to Perth to help promote a children's telethon. The next year, Michael Jackson came. And then Stevie Wonder called up and said he'd heard from the guys that Perth was the place to be. And he came. I watched all of this amazing rise, but when I was 21, Dad died. Suddenly, in his sleep, next to his devoted wife of 24 years. In one sense, he'd been the absolute definition of success. A fresh off the boat immigrant who rose to become an internationally known investor, kind and fair. Except by dying at 53, he never got to enjoy his successes. Never took a weekend off. Never saw a kid graduate college or carry a grandchild on his shoulders. As a result, I've done a fair bit of thinking about the definition of success, tried living a few definitions of it myself. And in the years leading up to 2020, I even wrote a book about it. So what are these traditional definitions of success, and are they working for us? Well, in the 2022 edition of the world's largest study on well-being by Gallup Research, of the high-income countries of the world, even though we've had a 10-fold increase in wealth since we started measuring growth, we've also seen large increases in the misery indices of loneliness, teen suicide, treated and untreated depression. Happiness across the globe has actually been falling, and it started 8 years before COVID. intuitively, we know that definitions of success that are narrowly defined, judged by other people, don't take into account the impact on our societies or on our planet. And they don't make any sense. Equally, I think we know that real definitions of success, broad criteria, created by the individual and only judged by them, and encourage our communities to thrive and are within what our planet can sustain. We've just been through the first event in recorded history that has impacted every single person on the planet at the same time. And this presents an incredible opportunity for change, but it's only change that's going to happen if each one of us alters the direction in which we're heading. And yes, COVID was really tough in many places. But a lot of people talk about the surprising gifts, reminding them of what was important, showing them what they could say no to, and slowing us down. But we know that is not good for our economies. Our economies depend upon a narrow definition of success, which is about accumulation and the resulting consumerism. I should know. I had a pretty good shot at it myself. When I was 14, I told my school guidance counsellor that I wanted to be a jockey or a photographer. He said I was too big for one, and the other one was just a hobby. He said economics or law. So I went and got an economics degree and then a law degree. Began my work life in New York as an investment banker. I had a startup producing performers like Jerry Seinfeld and Tap Dogs and sold that company. Took my next company public when I was just into my 30s and ended up running a rugby team with a Hollywood star, giving our supporters their first premiership in 43 years. Sure, I was doing it differently with more social consciousness, but I wasn't immune to conforming to other people's definition of success. In 2010, I quit a fancy job in Sydney to move to a small house in rural France and look after my twin girls. The mother of my kids had taken off to live the van life in Europe, and I wasn't invited. My biggest challenge, though, was how not to look like a quitter, right? So I announced I was going to write a book, an easy-to-read page-turner, colourful enough to sell in airports, about the secrets to my success. Now, anyone who's been the primary caregiver to 7-year-olds knows that wasn't going to happen, right? I'm the only English-speaking person available to my children in all of France, and I was determined to ride a day of the Tour de France, and I didn't have a bicycle. So I went to a bicycle factory, and they started building this bike, and I started observing and then photographing these artisans working with meticulous precision and appreciating the fulfillment they found in the excellence of their work. My girls, those artisans, taught me more meaningful definitions of success, which meant that writing that book rewrote me. Like when my daughter, after 2 days of intermittent crying, finally plucked up enough courage to tell me that she had a rash down there, I completely panicked. I went to Google, I found out what the problem is, found the solution, drove as quickly as I could to a French pharmacy where they only spoke French. So in sign language and interpretive dance, I made something that made them understand what I needed, and I got the cream. Driving back on empty roads, I held the cream out the window and shouted to the cows, because they were the only ones there, "I've got the cream! I've got the cream!" It was just a tube of cream, but I was going to be helping my daughter in distress. To this day, I'm not sure what beats that. They finished the bike. I rode it up and over 3 ridiculous hills with 8,000 other complete nutters. I mean cyclists. I certainly didn't win, but I'd worked out it wasn't a race. So I rode the ride. I rode the ride with a bigger smile than anybody else. How did I end the book? Well, I just started work as a writer. It was 2012, and I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, but the world didn't make sense anymore. My job was to write about the economic and political powers and the direction they were pulling us in. But there seemed to be an awareness that things weren't working that well. Stressed executives and nervous oligarchs, insecure politicians and well-meaning celebrities, but little consensus on the solutions. Nothing like the images of an all-powerful gathering determining the direction of the world. The publishers then printed my book, wrapped it in a colourful cover, perfect for airports. Only in early 2020, there was no one in airports. No book tour, no literary festivals, no international sales. Having written about an alternative definition of success, was I immune to feeling disappointment? No. Having your own definition of success isn't about aiming low, isn't about avoiding all feelings of loss. It's about ensuring that you reference you. And the things you can't control, pandemics and the opinions of others, don't change the conclusions you reach about yourself. My goal was to write a book that I was proud of for the people I love. And that was enough. But once you start to think this way, you're worryingly out of whack with the world, with our economic and political system, which is dependent upon growth, growth, and more growth. And what even is this growth thing? It's a 100-year-old concept. I mean, technically, it's a year-on-year increase in the gross domestic product that counts, and I quote, it counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways and special locks for our doors and jails for the people who break them. It counts nuclear warheads and armoured cars for the police. It counts television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Robert F. Kennedy said that almost exactly the week I was conceived. And yet, he went on, economic growth does not include anything for the health of our children, the joy of their play, nothing for the beauty of our poetry or the intelligence of our public debate. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, our wisdom or our learning. It measures everything, he said, except that which makes life worthwhile. Now, what's even more crazy, apologies for using this meme, but what's worse, we measure our rate of growth and judge it against a number, the rate of growth of other nations. That's a number that doesn't fit us, that we compare to numbers that don't work to other people. Is there any greater madness in economics and politics than this? I have learned from speaking to hundreds of people all over the world since COVID that we've changed. I've sat with princes and prime ministers, yoga teaching refugees like Rita here, global CEOs, with central bankers and baristas from Brooklyn. And the one thing that keeps coming back is that people are questioning our system, questioning their values, how much they work, where they work, and what they wish for their children. Never has there been such a widespread feeling that we're not going in the right direction. Instead of existing in harmony with the systems we created, we're on a different path. We are still addicted to growth at all costs. Despite talking about it for decades, this year will be our largest year of carbon emissions ever. Humanity has pushed beyond many of the Earth's planetary boundaries. And yet climate action is sold to us in terms of providing more growth, a green revolution to prime the economy. Not because it's great for our kids' future or the health of our oceans, but because it's good for our economy now. We are caught in a world where if it's up 9 for him, 1 for me, 0 for everyone else, we still say the economy's up by 10. But what if our societies were run differently? To measures relating to a new consensus for success, things that made life worthwhile. Like, how good would it feel if the government announced a target, say a 17.3% increase in meals shared by 3 generations at the same table, or a 10% increase in 7-year-old girls able to change a bike tyre, or 20% increase in time spent with friends watching the sun sink into the ocean. We can do this if we form a consensus that the real definition of success does not depend on growth at all costs. Let's ride our own races. Ask our societies to be run to our values. Our leaders will follow because, remember, they need us more than we need them. We can change the definition of success if we change ourselves. And fortunately, the one thing we absolutely can change is ourselves. Thank you.